Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're opening a case file that's not just a tragedy, it's also a masterclass in investigative work. We're going to review the evidence step by step and see exactly how detectives on the ground pieced this whole thing together. You know, every detective has those cases that just stick with them. This is one of those. It's an investigation that didn't just challenge a police department, it shook a quiet Arkansas town right down to its absolute core. It almost always starts with a single call. This one came in during the early morning hours. An empty bed where a little girl should be, and a mother's fear turning into absolute panic. For the investigators, the clock started ticking right then and there.
All right, to work any case, the very first thing you have to do is get to know your victim. You need to understand their life, their world, who they were close to. So let's take a look at who Jersey Bridgeman was.
Understanding a victim's background it's absolutely paramount. And Jersey's file, it shows this really stark contrast. She had a tough, unstable past with her father, so much so that there were convictions. But that was followed by this new chapter, a stable, loving home with her mom. By all accounts, she was a really bright and energetic little girl who was finally getting a chance to thrive. And here's a detail that, for investigators, is absolutely crucial: the environment. You see, trust was the bedrock of this neighborhood. The Hollies weren't just the people next door. They were inside the family's inner circle. They were trusted. Jersey even called the husband Uncle Zach. That detail, that becomes so important later on. An investigation really lives and dies by its timeline. So this establishes the last known moments of normalcy. The last time Jersey was seen alive was around 11 p.m. when her mom tucked her into bed. Her very last words to her were, "I love you to the moon and back." Just a few hours later, she was gone. No, when a child goes missing, the clock starts immediately. There is no waiting period. From an investigative standpoint, those first 48 hours, they are everything. So let's review the initial steps law enforcement took. So this is just pure police procedure done completely by the book. The 911 call comes in, officers immediately secure and search the main locations. Then they expand that search grid, and that's when an officer spots something that it doesn't fit: an open door on a vacant house. In that moment, the search for a missing girl tragically becomes a homicide investigation. Okay, with the scene secured, the focus immediately shifts to access and opportunity. In a case like this, the principle is simple. You start with the inner circle and you work your way out. Pretty much everyone is a person of interest until they are cleared by a solid, verifiable alibi. The goal isn't to accuse anyone, it's to eliminate possibilities one by one. All right, let's move into the interview room. This is where detectives really start to break down that timeline, compare everyone's stories, and look for anything at all that doesn't add up. This is where that big, wide net starts to get a whole lot smaller. And right away, the eliminations start happening. Jersey's mother and her boyfriend, their accounts of the night are totally consistent, and they're confirmed by things like workplace records. So they're cleared. But then we get to the neighbor, Zachary Hawley. His story is mostly consistent, but it has this one little detail that just catches the detective's attention. I mean, a walk to get something for an upset stomach? Sure, it's plausible. But a walk at 3:35 in the morning? That put Zachary Hawley out and about smack dab in the middle of the critical window of opportunity for this crime. It's an anomaly. And in an investigation, you have to pull on the thread of every single anomaly.
You know, a story is one thing, but physical evidence, that's a whole different ballgame. This is the point where the lab really takes over. Because interviews might get you suspects, but it's the forensics that get you convictions. This is where the truth really starts to come out.
And this is where everything just clicks into place. 3 things happen in really quick succession. First, Hawley volunteers for a polygraph, which is an act of confidence that experienced detectives always take note of. Second, the crime lab results come back, and they've got a match. And third, the final crucial piece of the puzzle, it comes from Hawley himself. This is what investigators call guilty knowledge. See, this wasn't a confession in words, it was a confession in his actions. By drawing this map, he showed this intimate knowledge of a crime scene that only the person responsible could possibly have. For the detectives in that room, that was the moment. The case was solved. With that map, the investigation has its conclusion, and it leads to an arrest. The man Jersey called Uncle Zach, the very neighbor who stood behind the police tape watching the search for her. He was charged with her murder. So, with the arrest made and all the evidence compiled, the case moves from the investigation phase to the judicial phase. All that work the detectives did now has to be presented clearly and methodically to a jury. Now, the trial itself was pretty unusual. The prosecution laid out all the forensic evidence, piece by piece. But the defense, in a really calculated move, they didn't even contest the facts. They called 0 witnesses and basically acknowledged their client's guilt. Their entire strategy was just to try and avoid the death penalty. The verdict came back fast. Guilty. The jury then moved on to the sentencing phase, and they considered each charge one by one. For the initial crime, unlawfully entering the residence, they handed down a sentence of 20 years. And then, for the kidnapping and the murder charges, they delivered 2 additional life sentences. This ensured that Zachary Hawley would never, ever leave prison. It was only after the sentence was delivered that Hawley finally spoke in court, offering this apology to a family whose trust he had so completely and violently shattered. And honestly, that's what makes this case so deeply disturbing. The most chilling part wasn't just the crime itself. It was the identity of the person who did it. Someone trusted, someone familiar, someone hiding in plain sight. And that brings us to the final, haunting question of this case. How was this betrayal even possible? How could someone do something so horrific and then just stand among the searchers, putting on a concerned face? The simple, terrifying answer for investigators and for all of us is that his very ordinariness was the most effective cover imaginable. And that is the fact that haunts this case to this day.